Welcome to this week's lecture in the unit Contemporary Social Issues and Professional Practice. It's now week 7. We made it to week 7 in the semester, so yay. And today we've got a guest lecturer to deliver the lecture which is titled Social Science Graduates in Professions. This is exactly a guest lecturer who's got that background, who is a social science graduate. And we've invited her to deliver this lecture for the students in this unit for this week, of course. So without further ado, I would like to introduce this week's guest lecturer, and that is Dr. Astrid Perry. She'll be joining us very shortly in delivering her lecture. Just before that, I would like to read a really short biography so you can actually know a little bit about our guest lecturer, but she'll talk plenty about her experiences from graduation to actually finding herself in occupations as well as professions, as well as arriving at the point that she's now a Chief Operations Officer with the Settlement Services International. So Astrid Perry, as I mentioned, does hold the position of Chief Operations Officer in Settlement Services International. Settlement Services International is a large non-government organization that delivers primarily services to culturally and linguistically diverse communities, including asylum seekers, refugees, children and in foster care, and people with disabilities. Astrid Perry holds a PhD in sociology from this university, from Western Sydney University. She has many years of experience in the social services sector with a specific focus on migrants and refugees. She has a particular interest in research and models of care to improve access to health services. And very timely, this is our guest lecturer for today. So please everyone welcome Astrid Perry.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I have to say it's a little bit eerie too, because in this lecture theatre was my very first welcome, not only to this university, but to any university. And I certainly remember it as if it was yesterday, because I remember what they said in the opening. They said, you know, if you're still here after 6 months, then you will make it all the way to your degree. So just bear with it, it'll be hard, but just come along on the ride. So it helped me many times later in life, and I thought it was a really good message to give to new students. So I hope that was your experience too. Anyway, I'm here today to talk a little bit about me and my career and how the academic kind of world intersected with my professional world. And so you will learn along the way how I traveled through my life along those lines, but also what it meant to me in both of the two worlds. So let's go with it. Which is in here. So just a little bit more about myself. I now work for an organization called Settlement Services International. It is very much, we'll stay on this one first. It is very much an organization that works with vulnerable people, but predominantly with migrants and refugees. So these are our 8 programs. So humanitarian settlement, which is the refugee arrivals, which we receive many at the moment, as you would have heard from Syria and Iraq and other countries, and we're expecting more next year. We also work with 5,000 asylum seekers or so that are waiting for their visa to be determined to see whether they can stay here. We have a housing service department that looks after emergency housing and also for the new arrivals. We are in a partnership with 21 settlement organizations. They provide ongoing support to migrant and refugees. We run a multicultural foster care, so that's for children that need to be in foster care, but we try to match them to their culture with a carer of their culture, or we give them a support person that actually speaks their language and comes from their culture, so that they're not later on thinking or wishing that they were brought up within culture. So it's really important. We have a big program of about 50 staff that work in Ability Links. So what they do is they work with people with a disability around goal setting, what they want to do in life, what they would like to improve about their life, whether they wanted to have a different social life, want a job, or just access for the railway station, or whatever it is. We work with them together to achieve that. We don't do it for them, we do it as a collaboration. Another program that we have that we set up ourselves is our Ignite Small Business Startup. So recent research actually shows that refugees are one of the most enterprising groups in Australia because they often set up a business. Part of it is because they might not necessarily get a job, but they often would have had a business maybe themselves overseas. The countries they come from, it is very normal to be enterprising and have their own business. So it's something they know in their own country, so they try it here again. It's just a human fact that you want to go with things that you are familiar with. But it is really good for Australia too, because small business, you hear it often said, is the backbone of Australia's economy. So we're proud of our refugees for setting up their own businesses, and we facilitate that with our startup program. And then we have a job active employment service, but it is very small. It's in Campsie, and it looks at the eastern suburbs more or less. But it is our way of having a foot in the door and understanding employment services better. And we've just found out that we've actually got a really good star rating for our employment services, so we're proud of that. So that's just a bit of an overview to see what I'm doing now. I'm the Chief Operations Officer, so I look after all these programs and mainly make decisions rather than running it myself. So, but it's very exciting because every day there's a different challenge. So I like that kind of work. Okay, back to me now and my career. So this is a very young me there. And you probably go, oh my God, look at the perms they used to have. And yes, indeed, we used to have those perms. And here's another one of mine, just to give you a little bit more of a chuckle. Anything wrong with the photo that you think is wrong? Smoke? I think it's back to front, actually, if you look at the number plate. So in those days, we only had printed photos, and then, 25 years later, we scanned them. I don't think it's my scanning. I think the printing at the time was wrong. But anyway, that was my very first car, as you can see. Lots of snow. That's because I'm from Switzerland, and we have, of course, the Alps, and we love our skiing. So, who am I? A little bit more about myself. And why, it probably gives some answers as to why I'm in the job that I am. Showing you all my programs and whatever, I can also ask you whether they would be the ones that you would come up with, looking at what people do in welfare or in community services. So for me, that's about me. I'm compassionate, I believe. I believe in fairness. I get quite angry against injustice. I have a strong social conscience, but I believe in people. I believe in the goodness of people, and I believe that people can change. Because if you don't believe that people can change, you might as well go home in my kind of work, because a lot of it is about change within themselves or change of the system and having a bigger goal that you can work towards. So I'm very much believing in people and their capability. And I guess the other thing about me is I would say that I'm probably from a lower middle class background, and I think that does give you sometimes insight into injustices and insight into what works well and doesn't work well. So I'm very much out of a family where carpenter, my grandfather was a carpenter in a factory. But then my father, the next generation, usually improves themselves a bit, an accountant, and then among my siblings, I have we're 5 altogether, and 4 of them would have gone to university. So every generation improves themselves a little bit, but we very much grew up with the kind of look at the poor guy down the road, look at those that have less than us, and we've got to do something about it. So sometimes it comes with you also from your family. But in life, there is a whole lot of other things that play a role, and they certainly have in my career. And so you do kind of have to have the coincidences in a way. I mean, not have to have. For some other people, it might work differently, but that's how it worked for me. Some people might call it fate. Some people might call it the path of God, or, so depending on your belief system, it can be something that's a given. I just call them coincidences, and sometimes they're big coincidences. And that's sometimes what makes you choose a professional or academic direction. So I thought, have a look at the symbol. What do you see? Yeah, multi-directionality. But I find it a real problem not to just see 4 squares, I have to say. But I did choose it for the directions, because the directions are open often. And then something happens, and all of a sudden you know which arrow you're going to take. So the first coincidence, really. So I leave school, or I'm still in school, but nearly the end. I have no idea what I want to do. My mother, of course, worried, as mothers are, looks through the newspaper, what she could see. So she sends me a letter, or rings me, I can't remember, because I was in a boarding school. And she said, oh, I just saw this thing in the newspaper, working with children in a children's home, and you are a Scouts leader, so that's something you should be able to do. Why don't you just go and work with children? And never thought about it before, really. I really didn't know what to do. I just knew I wasn't going to be sitting in an office. And I wasn't going to do sales. It just wasn't me. I did 2 little work placements, one in the telephone exchange, and you should have seen the telephone exchange. You can't picture it anymore. It was manually. You had to connect people into big sockets. So you would pick up and say who you want to ring, and then you connect them all. Some of it was automated. You didn't say anything anymore. You just connected them, but you still manually connected them. Couldn't see myself doing that all day. And the other one was in a pharmacy, selling things. And I just couldn't sell things because I felt like saying, oh, if you don't want it, that's fine. Which, of course, doesn't sell anything. So that's what I did. I worked with children. So here you can see some of them. And that's when I managed a children's home. But my first job was actually with children with behavioral challenges in a children's home, which was very, very tricky. But yeah, it's just a coincidence that my mother kind of said, what about this? And I just went, oh yeah, that'll do. It'll be, at least I get outdoors, it's creative, kids are lovely by and large, so there you are. And by the way, if you thought, where were these children sleeping? This was my car at the time. We don't have these cars anymore, but this is one of the most fun cars you can imagine. Because the back seat, you just unhooked with a little twist, you could unhooked it, and you could pull the whole back seat out, lock, stock, and barrel. And so I could load all the stuff that I needed for the school camp and all that for the kids in there. So I absolutely adored that car. So yeah, my early career then with children. So a boys' home first with behavioral challenges. Then a boarding school with girls, or it was a mixed school, but the group that I had were girls that had hearing difficulties. And they were teenage girls, so very, very difficult job. Hormones raging, plus having a disability, you can just imagine. And I was myself only 19 years old, so quite tricky. And then I managed a childcare centre, and that was fun because I had a combination of managing staff, budgets, finances, but still being able to spend time with the kids. And the key thing I learned doing that work is how much personality babies have. Don't ever think they're neutral, they're just babies. Have some contact and you realize what temper they have, what personality they have. Amazing. Anyway. Then I did some vocational training along the side. So in Switzerland, we don't do everything in universities. A lot of the professional work is like an apprenticeship. So I worked 4 days a week in a children's home, and 1 day a week I went to school for my residential care training. And then after that, I did the manager residential care course because I was managing the childcare centre, so I wanted to have some management skills. And that's all in Switzerland. As you can see, my car had a Swiss number plate. But then, coincidence number 2, I decided I needed a break after 8 years or so in working with children, and because I went into work straight away at 16, which is completely normal in Switzerland. It's still now, we don't keep young people in school as long as we do in Australia. And you really only go to matriculation if you want to have an academic career. So very different than vocational careers. So anyway, so I wanted a break, and I went on to a trip from Nepal to Switzerland. And it was a trip, an Encounter Overland it was called. I think some of them are still around. I traveled with 20 people at the back of a truck. And we were doing our own cooking and camping. And on that truck, there was 20 people or so, 13 Australians, 3 British, 1 Japanese, 1 American, and me. So I learned English pretty fast. But don't ask me what type of English I learned among all these young people. What do you think? Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot of swearing. And I used it, not realizing that I, in fact, was swearing. And the funny incidences occurred later. However, the main thing about this coincidence is that I met this fellow there with the cap on, so you can't see him very well, maybe for privacy reasons. And I'm sorry, the slide is a little bit dark, comes out a little bit dark there. But yes, I ended up marrying that fellow. So here I come, Australia. So certainly a big coincidence. Of course, it changed my career. Which you might say, why of course? Because I could have worked with children here. I didn't work with children here because a number of reasons, but one of them is certainly that they didn't recognize my qualifications. So I would have had to start from the bottom again. No residential care workers, like no professional course for residential care workers. The youth worker course might have just started, but it certainly was highly underpaid in comparison. And I also felt I needed to work then on my marriage rather than doing weekend work and evening work and so on. So I was definitely not looking for work with children. But we did have at the time 10% unemployment in Australia, 1983. And so it was very difficult to get a job. In fact, I got the sack once after 3 days because I couldn't pick up the Australian lingo fast enough. It was a sandwich shop, and I couldn't quite get the gherkins and the barbecue sauce and with butter, without butter, and some mashed avocado, and I just wasn't fast enough in a very busy city sandwich shop. So there you go. My first start in Australia, and this was after about 4 weeks in the country. So I probably was a bit silly to think that it would all work like that. So we will talk a bit more about the migrants lot, but tell me how long, I did buy a coffee shop after that, and how long do you think I waited to buy it? How much time do you think I gave myself to make that decision to actually become an entrepreneur myself? What do you think?
A year? 6 months?
Yeah, a year and a year or 6 months, that's what you would think is reasonable. And in fact, when our refugees come, we have the contract goes for 6 to 12 months for settling before we think they have a level of independence to interact with services themselves and orientation and all that. Well, I was a young person like yourself. I thought, I've got the sack. I thought, stuff this. I can do better than that. They've got 10% unemployment. I've gone for every job that I can reasonably do, including waitressing, things I haven't been trained for. And I bought the coffee shop after 6 weeks. Because my new husband, I think it was a very stressful time for him. He went along with it because, well, you know, we were newly married. You didn't want to upset the bride straight away. But in hindsight, I realized, knowing him better, that it was actually really, really stressful for him. But we did it. And in a way, it brought me to the third coincidence, which I'll talk in a minute. So, migrants lot, language barrier. As I said, I got the sack. Qualifications not accepted. Lack of experience in a new country. I didn't have a resume, a referee that said, yeah, she's good. I didn't have an Australian one. The Swiss one was pretty irrelevant. Not because I thought it was irrelevant, because the employers thought it was irrelevant. It would have been very relevant for some of the tasks. Not understanding the systems and the norms, how you do things here. I know my husband was shocked many times, said, oh, that's rude, you can't say that. Oh, I didn't know. Lack of social networks, so you had to build it all up again. The friends of my husband, they're lovely people, but they kind of weren't my cup of tea. And loss of status. As you could see, I was managing a childcare center. When I came here, it was like I couldn't do anything. Yeah. Okay, so the question down here is whether the migrants, like 30 years later, the new arrivals now, are still facing the same sort of challenges as I've just listed here. Yeah, look, some of it, yes. Certainly the language barrier, qualifications, systems, norms, in a way, all of this, but the social network has a bit changed. There's still a lack of social network here, but it's becoming, in some ways, a little bit less relevant because we have a global network. So what new arrivals, one of the first things they do is make sure that they can have Skype, FaceTime, that they can talk with their relatives. I think the loneliness is different. So when in my first years, we just had a phone call at Christmas and at our birthdays. It was so expensive. You couldn't really afford it. It was like $2.50 a minute or something. Like, you could hardly say hello, really. And we didn't have that much money. We didn't have that sort of income that we have today either. So I think the social networks has changed a bit. The loss of status still very much. If you have skilled migrants and your refugees that had to flee their country, often they had a good career. They had profession, skills, respected in the community, and then there is a real vacuum. And we find that it's particularly so for men. Somehow, often women are more used to adapt because they also have children. They might have a different perception of life, that you have to kind of face life the way it comes. I don't know exactly what it is. I haven't studied it. But we do see in our daily work that men often struggle more with the loss of status because it's often also unexpected. Yeah. But thanks, good question. So here is my coffee shop. It's in Hurstville. It is now a butcher, a Chinese butcher. That side of Hurstville has a lot of Chinese shops. But as I said, I thought, well, let's buy a coffee shop. Enterprising. So, and that's my fellow there. So you might recognize him without cap now, but still a beard. This is my third coincidence. Because what happened is, coffee shop, people come in and out. And this young woman came in, blonde hair, very Scandinavian looking. She said hello. I could hear there was an accent. She sat down, she had a coffee, and she had a book. we got talking, when did you come, what did you do, blah, 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 blah. Why did you come, and so on, to Australia. And so we had a little chat, and then I had a look at the book, and I said, oh, what are you doing? What's the book for? And she said, oh, I'm looking what course I want to do at university. And I said, can you go to university? Did you matriculate? Because in Switzerland, and her country too, she was from Denmark, you can only go to university if you matriculate. And she said, oh, no, no, in Australia you don't necessarily need to matriculate. You can go as a mature age student. Wow. It was a completely new world. First of all, I went home and I argued with my partner to say, why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? And of course he said, well, I didn't know. I didn't need to go to university. Like, I did the HSC here. Like, I don't know. Okay. With that, I saw my possibilities. And I thought, yep, that's it. I'm over 25. I can go to university. Of course, I looked into what I had to do and all of those kind of things. I didn't pass the English test sufficiently enough to make it to university, but I passed it sufficiently enough to come here, because this wasn't a university then. This was a higher institute of education. And it did have a diploma of community welfare. So there you go. That's how I ended up here. And that's certainly a big coincidence, because if she didn't walk in with that book, I would have known nothing about mature age entrance. Any of my husband's friends didn't go to university. They all did TAFE in those days. So it was a real eye-opener, and I'm very grateful to that woman, who I have no contact with. I saw her a couple more times. But she really was determining my career in Australia completely. So here you go, Higher Institute of Education, Milpera. My first academic job in my adult migrant English classes. If I didn't have that, I would have failed, because the topic was on human cells and the division of human cells. Very complicated topic. So, but an academic topic, I guess. And that was a real coincidence. After that, I had to study a lot with my dictionary. But yeah, it was nice. So I got a combination of vocational and academic content, because in essence, it was still vocational training, which is different than what you're doing now. But if you do the social work course, or the youth course here, then you still have practical field work and that's so on. So it was a mixture of vocational and academic, which certainly suited me. I did have quite a lot of background from my earlier studies, so that was helpful, particularly for sociology and psychology. I got really motivated to study, because for the first time, or maybe the second time, maybe in primary school and, you know, lower high school years, I did quite well, but then I went a bit off the rails. But I really had good results. It was very affirming, so it really motivated me to study. I met like-minded people. My God, I had my own friends. Such a big difference than having friends that I lent from my husband. So, so that was, you know, that was wonderful. I felt much more embedded. The social justice understanding increased because I got theoretical knowledge, and I loved the debates at university. I know these days you might not always get that much time for it because you all have to work part-time, but in those days we were, you know, chewing up the fat and we were changing the world and we knew it all. And as I said, we had high achievement, or I did, but many of us did because we were mature entrants. Most of us, or a lot of us, were mature entrants. And so we knew why we were there for, what we wanted to achieve. So what did I learn? I certainly learned some frameworks to better understand disadvantage, so that was very beneficial for my work. A more structural view of the world, in terms particularly in sociology, and how things interact. So not just power, but also how power manifests itself, who thinks they will have power, what is part of the traits that you have in the way you view the world or what you do with the world, political influence, philosophical influence, all those kind of things. And of course, structural things around how unemployment occurs, why we have unemployment, who benefits from unemployment. Some of those kind of things were really an eye-opener for me. And I guess there's a little story about that too, and I hope I don't bore you with my stories. But the funny thing is, because of my not so good English, I gave my assignments to my husband to read. And then one day we went to a dinner with other university friends, and I heard him using all the arguments from my assignment around unemployment. It was fantastic. He was learning while I was learning. I educated him while I got educated. It was really good because we were and still are some very different people, but you don't kind of know that from a holiday romance. So there you go. We were learning together, which is great. And him using my arguments, oh, great satisfaction. Anyway, of course I learned more psychology, added some building blocks to my previous training. Skills in working with clients, so a lot of you do that too, I'm sure, practicing interviewing skills with clients, that kind of thing. Group work, working together with others, but also group sessions if you did them with clients. Professional approaches, really important in the workplace later. And advocacy, fighting for improvements. Once I could be a citizen, straight away I became a citizen because I wanted to be able to vote. I didn't want to just have political thinking. I wanted to be able to participate. So very powerful. And that's me, graduating from the Higher Institute of Education, Milpera, it was called. Afterwards, it became MacArthur while I was still here. And then, of course, UWS, and now Western Sydney University. So there you go. Because the way I finished with relatively good results, I sort of thought, well, I should really keep on going and get that university degree. I guess I got challenged then, thinking I can do this. At that time, UWS just also started to become a university, Western Sydney University now. But I didn't stay. Why do you think I didn't stay? Well, I'll tell you, I didn't stay, to be honest, because I didn't trust it to be a university. A, and B, only because it was so new, and I thought nobody will know it. Nobody will know the degree. But look at where it's come now. It's a strong university, it's growing all the time, and it's just great the way it is assertive about being in Western Sydney and about serving the people of Western Sydney, because they're the people I'm working with too. And I can see among you, there's many of you from Western Sydney, and that's just fantastic. And it's got a great reputation. But of course, this is now 1986, and they were just changing. So they had nothing yet. And I certainly don't regret it that I went to University of New England, which is in Armidale, because what they did offer was a university degree by correspondence. And that had huge benefits later because I could studying all through having my children. Because I would just send my assignments in and you would listen to tapes. Of course, these days you would have recorded lectures, but in those days we had to listen to the tape. And you would go for residentials 4 days a semester. And that was fantastic. It was just like a little holiday. And you met so many people and we had great fun together. We didn't sleep too much, but we had great fun together. So I never regretted that, of course, going away. And it's also good to see a different university and a different environment. And afterwards, I came back here anyway, but to that will come later. So I certainly learned there about the benefits of face-to-face study, but I did do it by correspondence, but kind of both ways were quite good. I did statistics. Many of you would have done statistics, and it's not easy, especially somebody that, you know, left school at 15, started work 16. So it was a new world for me, but it opened exciting thinking, because I think in sociology particularly, that population-wide thinking and how a whole population is affected, and to actually being able to measure what's going on in a way that you know that statistically will repeat itself in the same way is actually really powerful and is very useful in the workplace, particularly in the kind of work that I do in community services, because we need to understand our population. We need to understand how the population changes and what's particular about the population. So we use statistical knowledge all the time. So it was a real eye-opener for me. However, I did deal with the agony of mathematics, having not got many mathematical concepts. That was hard. Did philosophy there, philosophy of the social sciences. Very challenging. And I still remember the most challenging sentence: aren't we just doing this to perpetuate ourselves? Our industry, so that we get paid and have jobs? Are we going round in a cycle, kind of creating the client for our own purpose? Very interesting question. I learned what I preferred between psychology and sociology, so I did a double degree, a double major, because I couldn't decide which one's for me. But at the end of it, I was very clear. Sociology is for me. I like the structural thinking. I like the way it makes you think about the world, how you can have a critical analysis of something that you have in front of you, and how it's your own thinking rather than just the thinking of somebody that done a test before, that you just have to repeat the same way to be able to come up with the same result or not. Much too narrow for me. So I like the structural and critical thinking that sociology can bring to the world. And I use it in my work every day, really. I also learned that maybe the purely academic world, not so sure about it. And also I did learn about the particular kind of evidence and truth of the academic world. So it was quite interesting to kind of think this through and what it meant for me. But as I said, it came up with a love for sociology and certainly a love for studying. So, you know, every time I had a bit of a break in between, except between New England, I don't think I had a break. But after New England, I thought, right, that's enough of studying. I got kids, I got this, I got that. You know, because all the way through, I also worked for paid work. So I thought, oh yeah, I'll go back and do a master's, because it was just at the time where masters became much more important, and because I loved studying, I was really missing it. So yeah, I came back to what was then, by then, the UWS, and I applied for a master's, to do a master's. But very soon after I started, I got pulled aside and they said, well, we think you should do an honours degree. We're new on university, we don't have enough honours, you know, with your results from University of New England, why don't you do an honours degree? So I thought about it and I thought, yeah, why not? Because you were going to go exactly the same classes. So the masters and the honours were together. So, you know, I wasn't missing out on anything, but I did have to write a major project. Anyway, I think now maybe I should have stuck to the masters, but that's a different story. So it opened the world for me for Bourdieu, Foucault, Baudrillard. I don't know whether any of you have studied some of them. I'm sure you have. Quite difficult concepts, but very challenging and interesting. Again, it just opens your mind to other possibilities. The binary thinking, I use that a lot every day also, because we often don't think about the two poles. We know positive, negative, male, female. And we don't realize how much that plays out in everyday life all the time. If you're not like this, you must be like that. Not 100 possibilities. So, so the other that sits behind of whatever you say is an interesting element that's always in our conversation. So it's the unsaid that is often really the important thing in a conversation. I'm sure you covered some of that, but for me, that was also a really important learning that I use all the time. Gender equity, of course, power relationships between the genders, we see it a lot. But of course, we also have another understanding now that gender is so diverse and so multifaceted. And there comes in the politics of difference, which is a whole set of studies around how difference operates. In a way, it's related to the other, but it's also people that then take it on assertively and say, we are different, and you need to leave us as different, and this is how difference plays out. So it's interesting. And of course, people assign to you difference. And that's a huge issue when people say, you're different. Implied in that is, and it's not good most of the time, or you're different so you don't understand, or some of those kind of things. So the politics of difference is really interesting, especially if you don't choose it yourself. If people go like, well, you're a migrant, aren't you? Yeah, I am, and so what? So that's how difference sometimes plays out. So it was great for self-analysis too, and where I stay, and what I might do around difference, and how I bring it into a situation. So I learned how it all applies to life, as I just showed, work and society. And of course, the other thing I really learned is that I'm not a writer. So writing doesn't come easy, and I certainly learned that the hard way with this project that I had to write for the honours thesis. I did pass, but with much too many words, which I could truly say is also a cultural thing, because the Germans can write one sentence, half a page. English, once I heard Anthony Giddens, one of our key sociologists, he said in black and white, English is a reductionist language. So you can say things in one sentence, or what I would consider half a sentence even, and we need a very flowery, long-winded sentence with lots of commas and what have you. So very different. So I did have too many words, and I got marked down. So I learned something about my writing. And then, of course, I then went on to honours, because then I won a scholarship to a PhD. I won a scholarship. I thought, oh, well, if they're going to pay me for it, there must be something right about me. So I did that as well. And I did it here, and I'm very, very wedded to this university and to this campus in particular, because most of my studies were on this campus. And as I told you, my very first day in this lecture room of my academic career. There you are, my PhD. Anybody has a question so far? Or we'll keep going. Yeah?
What made you come back to Western Sydney in your choice of education?
I had a very warm feeling towards it, no question. I loved the campus. I loved the trees and the greenery, I have to say. I come out here, even today, I just went like, that's just so beautiful out here. It's in the middle of the city, but it's like an oasis. And also, where I live, it's really just down the road. So it's about a half-an-hour drive. And you get a car spot. You tell me which university you can park your car. In Sydney. None. Apart from Western Sydney. I like it. I had kids, don't forget. Had to pick them up from school. Had to take them to school. Back and forth. Do the job in between. It was handy, as well as really loving the environment. And some of my lecturers were still here. I did my PhD with them. So, yeah, I love it. And I still do research projects with the university as well. And as I said, I come out here, I feel home, really. But what did I learn about it, doing a PhD? Somebody else, and I can't remember exactly who it was, probably one of your lecturers, possibly, said the PhD is endurance. It's about sticking with it. It's not so much about, sure, you need some skills, otherwise you never get even into the course. But once you're in a course, it is really about staying with it, and there's a high dropout rate. So if you stay with it, just like the thing with if you're here past the first semester, you're likely to finish, and the PhD is a little bit like that too. I learned a lot about my personality. Do I postpone it? Do I work at it? Do I get sick of it? You know? I also learned that I don't give up very easily. You know, there were moments that I thought, oh my God, I might as well throw it into the corner. But I thought, no, I've invested 2 years already. So I would have wasted those 2 years. What for? What's the benefit of that? I kept going. The world of academic teaching, before that, I was a participant. During your PhD, you usually do some tutoring. So I also learned about me, what it's like to stand in front of people, trying to motivate them. And I'm sure you know your fellow students, and it's not always easy to motivate them. But I also learned that pure academia is probably not for me. That I like that interface with people, and I like to develop people. So as a tutor, I would have my regular semester, but I'd have different students every time. And some of the students, I could see they were struggling, and I would have just liked to give them more support than what I could do as a tutor, and actually go with them in the development. And so I could see that, you know, the swanning in and out as a tutor wasn't for me. I needed to have that practical kind of developmental relationship with people. But that's an important thing to learn, because at that point I was on a trajectory to become an academic only. But of course, together with my writing skills, that challenged me, of course, as well, thinking, will I be able to write all these research papers that are required? So I learned a lot about where my place is as well, a little bit. What Western Sydney Uni means to me, so I already talked about that. Where my passion lies, generally speaking, more of my academic life kind of instilled that in me too, because you do your reading and you kind of go like, yeah, that's right. That doesn't sound right for me. You know, it's those kind of things. Dealing with setbacks, oh my God, the number of hours that with the PhD you felt completely depressed after your session with the supervisor. And you went like, oh my God, will I start again? Is there something in it still? Will I, you know, change my topic, change the focus? Hard work. But I was dealing with it. I moved on. Remaining determined, as I said, I thought, nah, I'm going to get to the end of this. And understanding my personal motivation. That can be quite private as well, in terms of showing my father that I could do it. It was a small motivation, but it was one with lots of satisfaction. On a more personal note. So then work life in Australia. So you kind of learned from my academic life, but I told you how it kind of influenced my work thinking. So let's have a look a little bit what I did for work in Australia. Before we come to a point where we talk about what is useful for you, because you're going out into the big world to look for a job. So we'll talk a little bit about what that could look like and what kind of skills that you learned at uni are transferable into the workplace. So first I worked in a neighborhood center, and then in their peak organization, the Migrant Project. And I think it's significant to look at what job you're doing first after university. Because it does kind of shape what you're going to do later, particularly if you like it, of course. So with the neighborhood center, you do a lot of community work, outward looking. You know, you run play groups, you run aged care groups, you learn, you know, people walk through the door that are homeless, women in domestic violence, those kind of things, and you respond to the needs that come in. You're not driven by a government that tells you you've got to move in and get that kid out. It's you and the community. And I think that shaped a lot what I became later. And at that time, I could have had a job, in fact, in child protection. But I could see how that would be very narrow for someone like me that likes be analytical thinking and then act on my thinking. So when you choose the first job, or when you when you don't like the job, be careful to think about, okay, where do I really want to be? So maybe the first one won't matter so much as long as you analyze whether it's for you or not for you. Otherwise, this becomes your career trajectory, because this is where you will have work experience. This is what people will respect when you go to the interview. They will go like, oh, that one doesn't have community work experience. They only have case management and so on. So it is important to kind of think about where you go. And so, yeah, that was perfect for me, really, in hindsight. Then I was the first migrant project in a neighbourhood centre in Sydney. So, of course, I'm a migrant, so I get kind of a little bit typecast as a migrant. So, of course, my early jobs were about being a migrant. And then, as it turns out, my later ones too. So I was an information project officer, and then went to local government for a multicultural or community relation kind of job. That was interesting, just learning about local government. Then I went to women's health, so we did information sessions in factories around healthy women. And then I went to a migrant resource centre as a manager, a non-government organisation. So quite a few NGOs there. Then I thought, well, I can still change my career and go proper into government. And I went to Centrelink, but I didn't last very long. It was very regimented. So my free thinking had very room in there, very little room for that. And then I actually came to the university to work here as a research coordinator, but very quickly my kind of old stamping ground caught up with me, because they went like, Astrid, you promised when this job becomes available, you're going to go for it. And I thought, oh my God, that's true. I better put in an application of sorts. But guess what? I did get it. So I was a manager of the Multicultural Health Service for the last 8 years or so, and then just changed a year ago into Settlement Services, another NGO, because at the end, NGOs will probably provide more options around part-time work, taking time off. Flexibility is really quite important. You know, at some point in your life, maybe now all you want is a full-time job. But later on, when you think, oh, I've got to do retirement planning and whatever, but I don't want to get, you know, completely cut off. I probably want to do part-time work. Then it's good to be in an NGO, because there's more flexibility there. So yeah, so my career trajectory and why I, entered university again was initially to get a new occupation, because the childcare obviously wasn't working for me anymore here. I enjoyed the different activities and in the work, but also the results, the academic results, they kind of interplayed. I kept an ongoing part-time involvement in the profession. So even when I did my PhD, I was still working 2 days a week in a migrant resource centre, because otherwise my skills development and my connections would have been lost, because in this industry, networks are very, very important. People need to know you. They get to know you through the networks. And your reputation can precede you. So it is quite important to keep a foot in the door. And because I couldn't work out, am I going to be an academic or am I going to be on the professional? Because I enjoyed it both. I am a Gemini. Maybe that's got something to do with it. And I just thought of that now, actually. Because it's not usually my thing. But maybe that's what it is, you know. Have a camp, have a foot in each camp, sort of thing. Ongoing skills development of confidence. So you develop skills in the profession, but you also develop research skills, academic knowledge. You apply it to your professional situation. And that together can give you a big level of confidence, really. As I said, I was typecast and probably still being typecast. There's certainly a glass ceiling for women, but there's definitely a glass ceiling also for migrants. In certain positions, for certain purposes, it's changing, it's improving, but still quite strong, if you look at our politicians, for example. And recognizing what I enjoy and what I'm good at. And I think that, you know, that reflection is really important for all of us. And as you go through life and your professions, you do more and more, if you think about it, more and more identify who you are and what you're good at and what's not your cup of tea. And that's a good thing, because when you're in a job like mine, in a management job, you make sure that the things you're not so good at, you get in your staff. And the stuff that you're good at, you know, you support your staff to also be good at. So you learn of each other. So it's important to know what resources you need to bring in, because you haven't got them yourself. Don't assume you can do everything. Here we go. And I think we are a little bit stuck now. Try again. Here we go. Learning and practicing the relationship between each other. So for me, each degree built on the other, because it was firmly, remember, compassionate, social justice, some of those kind of things that I feel is me. Well, these built on those kind of things, all of my degrees, really, because I also stayed true to sociology. And sociology has so much to offer in our type of area, where we work with people and with structure and with structural disadvantage. So all the way, because of my social justice bend, of course, I've worked with people that experience structural disadvantage. Each offered some practice development. So I told you some of those things. But each wasn't sufficient for work, because you need all the skills. So for me, that was kind of important interplay. Because even from the vocational course, it was good to have a true academic overlay. And key benefits, knowledge changes, understanding and outlook. And as I said, you know, there's a lot of questioning, a lot of critical thinking. The new understanding informs practice, so you change practice depending what you learn. And there's space for reflection. Like at university, that's when you have time to think about things. Sometimes at work, you don't. So having an academic kind of career or component to my life gave me that space to reflect. Forces learning. I'm not so good at just reading for the sake of reading an academic paper. So I learned it about myself. I probably have a little competitive streak, so I'd like to achieve it. So learning for an assignment, absolutely. Learning for the sake of learning only, probably not me. Okay? So it forced me to learn, because it gave me structure. And life experiences also, in turn, inform the studies and informs your thinking when you do your assignments. And you kind of go, I don't think that's true. There's got to be different evidence, because from my life experience, that doesn't sound true. And you might go searching some more.